I spent 2 months clearing brush, leveling ground, and laying gravel to build a road that ran straight to my farmhouse on land I bought, paid for, and worked with my own hands. The day I parked my truck there for the first time, the homeowners association showed up with a clipboard and a smile, telling me I owed them $200 a month for use of common access. I didn't know yet that saying no would turn into a war. My name is Jack Turner, and I was raised to believe a man should be able to come home without asking permission. This is the story of how I built something on my own property and had to fight to prove I had the right to use it. If you're watching this because you've ever been told you can't do what you want on land you own, or because you believe sweat equity counts for more than paperwork, then you already know how these fights begin. What I didn't know that first morning, standing on gravel I'd laid myself, was how far I'd have to go to prove I was right, and what it would cost me to win. 72 days after I signed the deed. The cabin stood framed but unfinished. A 12 by 16 structure with no front door yet, but enough roof to keep rain off the plywood floor. I'd drilled the well myself, 180 feet down through limestone and clay until the water came up cold and clean. The septic tank sat buried under 3 feet of Texas dirt, a 1,000-gallon concrete chamber that would outlast me. I'd run an electrical line from the nearest utility pole. 570 feet of copper wire strung on cedar posts I'd set in concrete. Cost me $8,400 through Bluebonnet Electric Cooperative. Every receipt was filed in a binder in my truck. Every permit was signed and recorded with Travis County. I didn't leave anything to chance. The land stretched 2.3 acres, flat enough to build on but wild enough that I'd spent the first month clearing mesquite and cactus with a brush hog. The survey report sat laminated in my glove box, 14 pages with a licensed surveyor's seal dated August 14th, 2024. I'd walked every foot of the boundary line with a tape measure and a GPS unit, planted orange-flagged stakes at each corner, then spray-painted the property line in bright yellow so there'd be no confusion about where my land ended and the county road began. To the east, 40 feet past my boundary, sat sterling oaks, 87 identical 2-story houses with white picket fences and lawns cut so uniform they looked like AstroTurf. A wooden sign at their entrance read, "Sterling Oaks HOA, a community of standards," in gold lettering that caught the sun. I'd bought this parcel for $187,500 from the Elias Howell estate. Howell had been a rancher who'd let the land sit fallow for 20 years before he died. His kids wanted nothing to do with rural Texas, so they sold it fast and cheap. I paid cash. Money I'd saved over 15 years working as a site engineer for commercial construction firms in Austin. My wife, Sarah, died 3 years ago from cancer. Our daughter Emily was in her 3rd year at UT Law. The apartment we'd rented in South Austin, 900 square feet with paper-thin walls, felt like a cage after Sarah passed. She used to say, "You don't need much, Jack, just a place you built with your own hands." So I bought land and started building. The sound out here was different from the city. In the mornings, I'd hear the low rumble of the caterpillar idling in the distance, the rhythmic thud of my hammer driving stakes into caliche, the wind scraping through dry grass like sandpaper on wood. From Sterling Oak Das, I'd hear the electric hum of riding mowers, the beep of SUV doors locking, the occasional bark of a small dog. 2 different worlds separated by a 2-lane county road and 40 feet of space that September afternoon. I drove into town to pick up cement bags from the hardware store. When I got back, the sun was starting to drop, painting the cabin in long shadows. That's when I saw it, a white envelope wedged into the doorframe of the cabin. No name on the outside, no postage, just clean white paper that stood out against the raw wood. I didn't touch it right away. Instead, I pulled out my phone and took a picture of it exactly where it sat. The timestamp reading 5:32 p.m., September 15th. Then I photographed the envelope from 3 different angles, making sure the cabin and the surrounding property were visible in the frame. Only after I'd documented everything did I pull it free. Inside was a single sheet of paper, laser printed, with a logo at the top, Sterling Oaks Homeowners Association. Incorporated. Pamela Stroud. President. Established, 1998. I read it standing there in the fading light, my boots still dusty from the drive. The letter called me a resident of County Road 442 and claimed my construction was creating visual and traffic impact on their community. It cited Section 7.3 of their covenants, conditions and restrictions, saying any roadway connecting to County Road 442 within 500 feet of their boundary required Architectural Review Committee approval. It also mentioned a $200 monthly fee for parking commercial vehicles on any visible roadway. I folded the letter and slid it back into the envelope. Then I walked to my truck, pulled out the laminated survey map, and spread it across the hood. My property line stopped 40 feet west of County Road 442. Sterling Oaks HOA jurisdiction ended exactly at the eastern edge of that road. There was no overlap, no shared boundary, no legal connection between their subdivision and my land. I wasn't a member of their association. I'd never signed their covenants. The county records were clear. I didn't call anyone that night, didn't get angry. I sat on the cabin steps with a flashlight and read the letter 3 more times, underlining key phrases with a red pencil. Resident. Our community, 500 feet, $200 monthly. Then I opened my laptop, scanned the letter, and saved it in a folder I created called Property Defense. The file name read HOA_001_009.15.2024.pdf. After that, I opened my notebook and wrote a single line at the top of a blank page, September 15th, first contact, document, everything. I didn't open the letter again until after I'd eaten dinner. A can of chili heated on the propane camp stove I kept in the corner of the cabin. The Coleman lantern threw yellow light across the plywood table where I'd spread out the HOA letter next to my property documents. The contrast was stark, their laser-printed corporate letterhead against my hand-annotated survey map. Their claims about community standards against the recorded deed that showed my land sitting entirely outside their jurisdiction. I took my time reading every word, not because I didn't understand it the first time, but because I wanted to make sure I wasn't missing some legal angle I hadn't considered. The letter referenced Section 7.3 of their CC&R's covenants, conditions, and restrictions. I'd never signed any such document. I'd never attended any HOA meeting. I'd never paid any HOA dues. The only connection between my property and Sterling Oaks was proximity. The fact that we both accessed County Road 442 from different points. Their subdivision sat east of the road, and my land sat west. The county road itself was public right-of-way, maintained by Travis County, not by any homeowners association. The letters claim that I needed their approval for a driveway on my own property had no legal foundation. But I'd learned over the years that people with clipboards and official letterhead often counted on others not knowing the difference between a rule and a threat. I opened my laptop and navigated to the Travis County Appraisal District website, pulled up my property record, and printed out the official parcel map. The boundary lines were clearly marked. My parcel number was 14-B-7709. Sterling Oaks parcels all started with 14-A. Different sections, different plat maps, different legal entities. I saved the PDF with the file name property_boundary_official_09.16.2024.pdf and added it to the property defense folder. Then I scanned the HOA letter and filed that too, making sure every document had a date stamp and a clear file name. If this turned into something bigger, I wanted a paper trail that could stand up in court. The next morning, I drove past Sterling Oaks on my way to pick up gravel for the driveway I was planning to build. The entrance was marked by brick columns and that wooden sign with gold lettering. Inside, the streets were immaculate. No cracks in the asphalt, no weeds in the flower beds, no trash cans left out past collection day. Every house looked like it had been painted within the last 5 years. Every lawn was the same shade of green, cut to the same height, edged with the same precision. It was the kind of neighborhood where conformity was currency and deviation was debt. That's when I saw her. A woman in her early 50s, standing in front of a house 3 streets in, holding a brown leather clipboard and talking to a younger couple who nodded along like students being lectured by a professor. She wore a pale pink cardigan over khaki pants, pointed toe flats, and oversized sunglasses with gold frames that caught the morning light. Her car, a silver Lexus RX 350, sat parked in the driveway behind her, spotless and gleaming. I slowed down as I passed. She turned her head, and for 2 seconds, our eyes met through my truck window. She didn't smile, didn't wave, just gave a single deliberate nod, the kind that said, "I see you." Then she turned back to the couple and continued talking. I kept driving. That evening, my daughter Emily called from Austin. She'd just finished her property law class and wanted to know how the build was going. I told her about the letter. She went quiet for a moment, then asked, "Dad, you got the deed recorded with the county, right? And you never signed any HOA agreement?" I confirmed both, she said. "Then they have zero authority. But Dad, people like that don't stop with one letter. They'll keep pushing until you push back." I looked out the cabin window toward the distant lights of Sterling Oaks, a grid of yellow squares glowing against the dark Texas sky. "I know," I said, after I hung up. I sat at the plywood table and opened the Notes app on my phone. I typed a single line, "Next step, document everything, every letter, every contact, every interaction." Then I closed the phone and picked up a red pen. I opened my project notebook to a fresh page and wrote across the top in capital letters, "Property Defense Timeline." The first entry read, September 15, 2024. Received first contact from Sterling Oaks HOA. The letter claims authority over private property. No legal basis. Filed and documented. I underlined the date twice, then closed the notebook and set it next to my laptop. The cabin felt smaller that night, not because the walls had moved, but because the world outside had gotten more complicated. I'd bought this land to build something simple, a place where I could work with my hands and come home without asking permission. But already, 3 months into ownership, someone was trying to rewrite the terms. I thought about what Emily had said, about people who don't stop with one letter. I thought about the woman with the clipboard and the Lexus and the deliberate nod. And I thought about the fact that I'd spent 15 years on construction sites, learning that the people who win disputes aren't the ones who yell the loudest. They're the ones who document everything, follow the process, and wait for the other side to make a mistake. I didn't know how long this would take, but I knew I wasn't going anywhere. This was my ground. I'd earned it. And I wasn't giving it up because someone printed a letter on fancy paper. The concrete truck arrived at 5:30 a.m. on a Saturday, 3 weeks after the letter. I'd hired Miguel Santos and his younger brother Carlos to help with the pour. 220 feet of driveway, 12 feet wide, 4 inches thick over a 6-inch base of compacted gravel. Miguel had worked with me on a commercial job in Austin 2 years back. Good with a trowel and better with timing. We'd prepped the site all week, laying the gravel base, setting 2x8 wooden forms along both edges, checking the grade with a level every 10 feet to ensure a 2% slope for drainage. Everything had to be right the first time. Concrete doesn't forgive mistakes. The Mac granite mixer from Capital Ready Mix backed up to the edge of County Road 442, its yellow drum rotating slowly and steadily. Miguel stood at the chute, directing the flow, while Carlos worked the bull float across the wet surface, smoothing it in long strokes that left no ridges. I ran the Makita plate compactor along the edges, the vibration traveling up my arms and into my shoulders, a steady hum that drowned out everything except the work itself. The concrete came out gray and thick, flowing like heavy cream down the wooden chute, filling the forms with a weight that felt permanent. This wasn't temporary. This wasn't something that could be undone with a letter or a clipboard. This was a road, and roads last. Miguel worked without talking much, just the occasional question about depth or placement, when he did speak. His voice carried the flat pragmatism of someone who'd learned English on job sites. 4 inches, right? He asked, and I nodded. We'd gone over the specs 3 times already, by 9 a.m., The pour was done, the surface smooth and level, the edges sharp where they met the wooden forms. Miguel sat on his heels at the edge of the fresh concrete, pulled a water bottle from the igloo cooler, and drank half of it in one go. He looked at the road, then at me, and said, "Your wife would have liked this, Jack." I didn't answer right away. Sarah had died before I bought the land, but she'd always talked about having a place where we could see the horizon without buildings in the way. She would have helped pour it, I said finally. Miguel smiled, nodded, and stood up. Carlos was already rinsing tools with the hose I'd rigged from the well, water splashing over aluminum and steel, washing away the gray film before it could harden. Around noon, a neighbor I hadn't met before pulled up in a red GMC Sierra, an older man with sunburned arms and a faded Astros cap. His name was Bill, 62, a retired electrician. He asked if we needed help. I told him we were good, but I offered him coffee from the Stanley thermos in my truck. We stood in the shade of a live oak while he told me he'd heard the HOA president had been asking questions about me. "She doesn't like folks doing their own thing," he said, squinting toward Sterling Oaks. "Likes everything neat and managed." I thanked him for the information and watched him drive off, his truck kicking up dust as it disappeared down County Road 442. By mid-afternoon, the concrete had begun to set, the surface losing its wet sheen and taking on the matte gray finish that meant it was curing properly. That's when I saw the Lexus. It came from the direction of Sterling Oaks, slowed as it approached my driveway, and stopped for maybe 10 seconds, engine idling. The driver's side window was down just enough that I could see the outline of blonde hair and the glint of eyeglasses. Then the car moved on, slow and deliberate, like someone taking inventory. I didn't wave, didn't acknowledge it, just watched until it disappeared around the bend. Miguel was packing tools into the bed of his truck when he asked, "Jack, have you ever dealt with HOA before?" I told him no. He nodded, wiping his hands on a rag. "My cousin did. They fined him $50 for leaving his trash can out one day late. He paid it, said it was easier than fighting." I looked down at the concrete driveway, still wet enough to reflect the sky. "I'm not your cousin," I said. That evening, after Miguel and Carlos left, I sat at the plywood table inside the cabin and opened my project binder. I added a new timeline entry, September 21st, concrete pour completed, permanent structure, witnessed by Miguel and Carlos Santos. I underlined permanent twice, then closed the binder. The driveway would take 3 days to cure fully. But it was already more than just a surface to drive on. It was a statement, not written in words but poured in aggregate and cement. A line drawn in gray that said, "This ground was mine, and I'd built on it with my own labor." I thought about what Miguel's cousin had done, paying a fine for something that shouldn't have been a violation in the first place. And I thought about the Lexus slowing down to watch. I didn't know what was coming next, but I knew I wasn't going to be the one who blinked first. The road was real now. The paperwork from Sterling Oaks was just ink on paper, and ink doesn't hold up against concrete. She arrived on a Monday afternoon, 3 days after the concrete had cured. I was cutting oak beams for the porch frame with a Husqvarna chainsaw, the blade chewing through wood in rhythmic passes, sawdust gathering at my boots. The sun came through the live oak branches at a sharp angle, throwing patterns of light and shadow across the ground, half the workspace bright and half dark, with clean lines where they met. I didn't hear her approach over the noise of the saw. I just looked up and saw a figure standing 15 feet away, half in shadow under the tree, holding that brown leather clipboard like it was a warrant. I shut off the chainsaw. The silence came down heavy. She stepped forward into the light, and I got my first clear look at Pamela Stroud. Early 50s, pale blue cardigan over a white blouse, beige slacks, pointed flats that had no business on a construction site. Her sunglasses were oversized with gold cat-eye frames that reflected the afternoon sun in 2 bright points. Behind her stood a man in a white polo shirt. No introduction, no greeting, just standing there like hired muscle in business casual. She opened the clipboard, clicked a silver Parker pen twice, and tapped it against the paper. "Mr. Turner," she said, her voice smooth and controlled. The kind of tone people use in meetings when they're about to tell you something they've already decided. I'm Pamela Stroud, president of Sterling Oaks HOA. I believe you received our letter, and I wanted to follow up in person because I think there's been a misunderstanding about jurisdiction and community standards. I set the chainsaw down on the sawbuck, pulled off my work gloves, and wiped the sweat from my forehead with the back of my hand. I didn't say anything, just looked at her and waited. "The road you built," she continued, glancing past me at the concrete driveway, "connects directly to County Road 442, which is our shared access point. And under Section 7.3 of our CC&Rs, that makes it subject to architectural review and compliance fees." Her words came out rehearsed, like she'd given this speech before to other people who didn't know how to push back. I kept my voice level. "I'm not subject to your CC&Rs, I said. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "That's a common misconception. Visual impact extends beyond legal boundaries. Not according to Texas property code," I said. The smile thinned. She shifted her weight, the clipboard moving slightly. "Mr. Turner, I understand you're new here, but this community has worked for years to maintain standards that protect everyone's investment, and we can't allow one individual to undermine that through improvisation." The word hung in the air between us, sharp and dismissive. I looked past her at the man in the polo shirt, then back at her. "I'm not improvising," I said. "I'm building on my property." Her patience was wearing thin now. I could see it in the way she gripped the pen. "If you refuse to comply, we'll pursue remedies. County code enforcement, civil court, liens if necessary." The threat was clear, delivered with the confidence of someone who'd used it before and watched people fold. I kept my voice calm. "I didn't sign anything," I said. She stared at me for a long moment, the reflected sunlight in her glasses making it hard to see her eyes. Then she turned, wrote something on the clipboard, the pen scratching against paper. When she looked back, her voice had gone cold. "We'll see." She paused before leaving, glancing at my truck. "Oh, one more thing. Parking a commercial vehicle on a visible roadway within our enforcement zone is a $200 monthly violation. Invoice will be mailed." Then she turned and walked back toward the silver Lexus parked on County Road 442, the man in the polo shirt following without a word. I stood there for 30 seconds after they drove off, not moving, just letting the silence settle back in. I photographed the Lexus from a distance, capturing the license plate Texas BXR 4021, then the tire tracks at my property line. I opened notes and typed September 23, 4:17 p.m. Pamela Stroud was on the property without permission. Threat of legal action documented. Miguel came out of the cabin where he'd been working on interior framing. "Who was that?" he asked. I saved the note and slid the phone into my pocket. "Someone who thinks paper gives her power over dirt," I said. Miguel looked at the tire tracks, then at me, and grinned. "Paper burns. Man, concrete doesn't." That night, I got an email from an admin at sterlingoakshoa.org. The subject line read, "Formal Violation Notice, Parcel 14-B-7709. Attached was a 4-page PDF with the HOA logo at the top and Pamela Stroud's digital signature at the bottom. The final page stated in bold letters, "Failure to remit payment within 30 days may result in lien placement on property." I didn't open the attachment. I forwarded the email to Emily with a one-line message, "Can they do this?" Then I opened my project binder, turned to the timeline page, and added a new entry, September 23, in-person confrontation, threat of lien, email violation notice received. I took a red pen and underlined the word lien twice, pressing hard enough that the ink bled through to the page beneath. Then I closed the binder, turned off the laptop, and sat in the dark cabin listening to the wind move through the oak trees outside. Somewhere in the distance, the lights of Sterling Oaks glowed like a small city, orderly and controlled. Out here, in the dark, I had nothing but land and a road I'd poured myself, and that was enough. I came back from town 10 days later with 8 cedar boards strapped in the bed of my truck, 2x6s I'd picked up from Home Depot for the porch railing. It was a Thursday morning, early October, the air still cool enough that you could work outside without drowning in your own sweat. I turned onto County Road 442 and saw it from 100 yards out, a chain-link gate on wheels, 6 feet high, 14 feet wide, stretched across the entrance to my driveway. Galvanized steel frame, yellow master lock hanging from the latch, and a laminated plastic sign zip-tied to the top bar that read in red block letters, "Private Property, Sterling Oaks, HOA, no parking." I pulled up to the gate and cut the engine. The silence pressed in from all sides. I got out, walked to the gate, and put my hand on the steel frame, still cold from the morning air. No rust yet. Installed recently, probably before dawn. The ground around the base showed fresh tire tracks from a trailer, coming from the direction of Sterling Oaks, crossing the county road shoulder, and stopping right here at the entrance to my property. I pulled out my tape measure from my belt and checked the placement. The gate sat 6 inches inside my property line, planted squarely on land I owned, blocking access to the concrete driveway I'd poured 3 weeks ago. I didn't try to cut the lock. Instead, I took out my phone and started recording. A 360-degree video panned the gate, the sign, the tire tracks, the orange stakes still marking my boundary line 40 feet from Sterling Oaks. Then I switched to photos. Close-ups of the master lock with its serial number visible. ML410KA. The welds on the steel frame. The laminated sign with its HOA logo. I opened my GPS app and dropped a pin at the exact coordinates 30.4371 degrees north, 97.8102 degrees west. Then I opened Notes and typed October 3rd, 2024, 7:42 a.m. A gate was installed on my property without permission. Obstruction of access. Potential trespassing plus criminal mischief. Texas Penal Code Section 28.03. Document for sheriff report. The whole process took 8 minutes. No words, no anger, just methodical documentation. When I was done, I called the Travis County Sheriff's Office non-emergency line. The dispatcher asked if it was an emergency. I said no, but it was a property dispute that might involve trespassing. She said they'd send someone within 2 hours. I thanked her, hung up, and drove around to check Sterling Oaks. At the community bulletin board near their main entrance, I found a new flyer, full color, printed on glossy cardstock. It showed an aerial photo of my concrete driveway, taken from high up. Definitely a drone shot. The headline read, "Notice to Residents. Unauthorized construction impacting community safety." The text below claimed an individual outside the HOA had built an unapproved roadway that increased traffic, noise, and potential liability, and that the board was taking legal action to protect property values. My name wasn't mentioned, but anyone who drove past my land would know exactly who they meant. I took a photo of the flyer, didn't pull it down, just documented it where it hung. Then I added a note, defamation attempt, no factual basis, photo taken without permission, possible drone trespass. By the time I got back to my property, Deputy Ryan Cole had arrived in a white Travis County Sheriff's Explorer. Ryan was 31. Someone I'd helped 2 years ago when a storm tore shingles off his garage, and I spent a weekend patching it for free. He stepped out of the cruiser, looked at the gate, then at me. "Jack, is this on your property?" he asked. I handed him the laminated survey report dated August 14th. He studied it, pulled out a laser distance meter from his belt, and measured from the county road to the gate. Then he measured from the gate to my orange boundary stakes. Everything confirmed what I already knew. Ryan wrote up an incident report, number 2024-10-03-0412, noting obstruction of private property access and possible criminal trespass. He handed me a copy and said, "I can't remove the gate for you. That's a civil matter, but you can file a complaint and request the HOA remove it. If they don't, you can cut the lock yourself. It's your property, but I'd recommend doing it with a witness and documenting everything." I thanked him, and he drove off, dust kicking up behind his tires. I stood in front of that gate for a long time after Ryan left, not staring off into the distance or contemplating my next move, just standing there looking at the thing. Then I pulled out my phone and opened my email. I typed a message to Emily. Subject: need legal template. Demand letter for obstruction removal. Body HOA installed a gate on my property. Sheriff confirmed trespass. I have 48-hour deadline in mind. Can you send me a template tonight? Need to mail certified tomorrow. I hit send. Then walked to the truck bed, pulled out a blue plastic tarp, and started unloading the cedar boards. The gate wasn't going to stop me from working. It was just another obstacle, one that could be dealt with through the right process, in the right order. First, the demand letter, then the waiting period, then action if they refused to comply. I'd learned a long time ago that the people who win these fights aren't the ones who react with emotion. They're the ones who follow procedure and let the other side make the mistakes. The gate stood there, locked and gleaming in the October sun, but it didn't own the ground beneath it. I did, and that was the only fact that mattered. Emily sent the template that night, a Word document based on Texas Law Help, a non-profit legal resource site. I sat at the plywood table under the Coleman lantern and adapted it line by line, replacing generic placeholders with specifics: my name, my parcel number, Pamela Stroud's name, the Sterling Oaks HOA mailing address. I cited Texas Property Code Section 202.003, the statute that protects a property owner's right to access their land without interference from entities they never consented to join. I cited Texas Penal Code Section 28.03, criminal mischief, for the gate installation. I attached a copy of my recorded deed, my survey report, and the sheriff's incident report number. The letter was 2 pages, single-spaced, Times New Roman 12-point font. No emotion, no threats, just facts and a 48-hour deadline for removal. I printed it, signed it in blue ink with my Parker pen, scanned it back into a PDF, and saved it as demand_Sterling_Oaks_HOA_10.04.2024.pdf. The next morning I drove to the post office in town and sent it via certified mail with signature confirmation. Tracking number 94055-11188-246-1703-18659. I kept the receipt in my project binder, taped to the timeline page next to the entry that read, October 4th, demand letter sent, certified mail, 48-hour removal deadline. That Saturday. I drove to Bill's place, the retired electrician with the red Sierra who'd stopped by during the concrete pour. He lived 2 miles down County Road 442 in a single-story ranch house with a metal roof and a workshop out back. Bill introduced me to Howard Brecht, a 67-year-old man who'd lived in Sterling Oaks since 2005 and sat on the HOA board until Pamela Stroud started running things like a corporation. We sat on Howard's porch with bottles of Shiner Bock, looking out toward the county road. Howard told me what I'd suspected, but hadn't confirmed Pamela had tried to buy my land from Elias Howell a year before he died, offering him $220,000. Howell refused. When the estate sold it to me for $187,500, Pamela was furious. She'd been planning a Phase 3 expansion of Sterling Oaks onto that parcel for 3 years. She can't force you to sell, Howard said, but she can make your life hell until you give up. She did it to the Nguyen's on Oakmont Drive, fined them $2,000 for an unapproved fence color. They moved 6 months later. I drank my beer and looked at the county road stretching out under the late afternoon sun. I'm not moving, I said. Howard smiled. Good, because half the neighborhood is tired of her, but they won't speak up unless someone else goes first. He told me about the HOA general meeting scheduled for the end of October, a Wednesday night at 7 p.m. in the Sterling Oaks Clubhouse, under Texas Property Code Section 209.0051. Any person with a property dispute involving an HOA has the right to address the board during the open forum portion of the meeting. 3 minutes maximum. You're not a member, Howard said. But if you have a dispute, they have to let you speak. It's state law. I wrote it down in my phone October 30th, 7 p.m., Sterling Oaks Clubhouse, 4201 Sterling Oaks Boulevard. That evening Emily called. She'd found a case. Texas Court of Appeals from 2019. Rodriguez versus Meadowbrook HOA. The facts were nearly identical. An HOA tried to enforce architectural standards on property owned by a non-member based solely on proximity and claimed visual impact. The court ruled against the HOA unanimously, stating that an association may not enforce its covenants, conditions, and restrictions upon property owners who have not consented to such restrictions, regardless of proximity. Emily sent me the PDF, 23 pages. I read it twice, highlighting the key passage on page 21, then saved it to my property defense folder. I opened my project binder and turned to the timeline page. In red pen, I wrote, October 5th, case precedent located. Rodriguez versus Meadowbrook, Texas Court of Appeals 2019. HOA has no jurisdiction over non-member property. Prepare for public meeting on October 30th. I underlined October 30th 3 times, pressing the pen hard enough that the ink pooled slightly at the end of each line. Then I closed the binder, turned off the lantern, and sat in the dark cabin listening to the wind outside. The gate still stood at the end of my driveway, locked and immovable. But I wasn't trying to move it yet. I was building something more permanent than steel, a case built on documents, statutes, and recorded facts. Paper alone didn't mean much, but paper backed by law and evidence was different. That was the kind of weight that could shift an obstruction without ever touching it. The next day, I drove past the gate on my way to pick up supplies. I didn't stop, didn't stare at it, just noted that it was still there, still locked, and kept driving. Pamela Stroud had made her move. Now it was my turn, but not the way she expected. I wasn't going to cut the lock in anger or file a lawsuit out of frustration. I was going to walk into that clubhouse on October 30th with a 3-ring binder full of evidence and 3 minutes to say what needed to be said. And I was going to let her explain to her own community why she thought bylaws gave her the right to block a man's driveway on land she didn't own. Some fights you win with your hands. Some you win by making the other side answer questions they can't. The Sterling Oaks Clubhouse was a single-story building with a red tile roof and white colonial columns, sitting at the end of a cul-de-sac lined with Bradford pears. I arrived at 7:05 p.m. on October 30th, parked my truck in the back corner of the lot next to a row of Hondas and Toyotas, and walked in carrying a navy blue 3-ring binder. Inside, about 55 people sat in folding chairs facing a long table draped with a green cloth where 5 board members sat. Pamela Stroud occupied the center seat, flanked by 2 men and 2 women I didn't recognize. A woman in her 40s sat at a smaller table to the side, typing on a laptop, the meeting secretary. I took a seat in the 4th row, aisle side, opened my binder on my lap, and waited. Pamela ran through the agenda in a brisk, business-like tone: landscaping budget approval, pool maintenance contract renewal, architectural review updates. When she reached ongoing legal matter regarding non-compliance adjacent to our community, her voice sharpened slightly. She explained that the board had sent formal notices to an individual who'd constructed an unauthorized roadway near their boundary, installed temporary access control to protect community liability, and was prepared to escalate to civil court if necessary. A few people clapped. Several turned in their seats to look at me. I didn't react, just sat with my hands resting on the closed binder. "We now open the floor for resident comments," Pamela said, glancing at a printed agenda sheet. 3 minutes per speaker. I stood up. She looked at me, and her expression tightened. "Mr. Turner, you are not a Sterling Oaks resident. This forum is for members only." I kept my voice level. Texas Property Code Section 209.0051 allows any person with a property dispute involving the HOA to address the board during open forum. "I have such a dispute." Pamela looked at the man in the gray suit sitting at the end of the table, the HOA attorney. He nodded slightly. She turned back to me. "You have 3 minutes." I walked to the front, stopping 10 feet from the board table, binder open in my hands. I didn't need a microphone. The room was small enough that everyone could hear. "My name is Jack Turner. I own parcel 14-B-7709. Recorded with Travis County on July 22nd, 2024. This parcel is located west of County Road 442, fully outside Sterling Oaks HOA boundaries. I held up the laminated survey report, and the secretary took it, scanned it, and projected it onto a screen behind the board table. The map showed the clear separation between my land and theirs. On September 15th, I received a letter from your president claiming I need architectural approval for a road I built on my own property. On September 23rd, she visited my property and demanded I pay $200 per month to park on my own land. On October 3rd, a steel gate was installed on my property without my permission, blocking my access. Pamela interrupted. That gate was installed on the public right-of-way to prevent illegal parking. I didn't raise my voice. It was installed 6 inches inside my property line. I have GPS coordinates, photographs, and a Travis County Sheriff's incident report confirming trespass. The secretary projected the photos, the gate, the coordinates, the sheriff's report number. The room went quiet. I continued. I have never signed your CC&Rs. I am not subject to your rules. Texas Property Code Section 202.003 states that a property owner's right to access their property cannot be restricted by an entity to which they have not consented. Your board has violated my property rights, committed criminal trespass, and defamed me through public flyers. The secretary projected the flyer photo, the one I'd taken from the bulletin board. I sent a certified demand letter on October 4th. You have not responded. The gate remains. Tonight I'm asking this community, is this the kind of leadership you support? Pamela stood up, her face flushed. Mr. Turner, you are disrupting a private meeting. I held my ground. This is a public forum under state law. Her voice went higher. Your so-called property was supposed to be part of the Phase 3 expansion of Sterling Oaks. Elias Howell promised to sell it to us before he died. You swooped in and stole it. The room erupted in whispers. The attorney in the gray suit tried to interject. Pamela, don't. But she kept going. We've been planning that expansion for 3 years. You have no right to build your shanty out there and drag down our property values. Howard Brecht stood up from the second row. Pamela, he owns the land legally. You can't force him to sell. She turned on him. Stay out of this, Howard. He didn't sit down. I won't. You've been bullying people for years. Enough. The door at the back of the room opened, and Deputy Ryan Cole walked in full uniform, and stood against the wall. He didn't say anything, just stood there. The room went silent again. Pamela sat down, her hands shaking slightly. The attorney leaned over and whispered something to her. She didn't respond. The attorney addressed the room. The board will review this matter and respond in writing within 10 business days. I closed my binder. The gate needs to be removed within 48 hours, or I will remove it myself and file a civil claim for damages. Ryan spoke from the back. For the record, Mr. Turner has filed a formal complaint with the sheriff's office. Any further obstruction will be documented. Pamela stared at the table in front of her, not looking up. The secretary typed rapidly, recording everything. I walked out of the clubhouse into the cool October night. 3 residents followed me to the parking lot, including a woman in her 50s named Linda. Mr. Turner, thank you for standing up. A lot of us didn't know how bad it was. I nodded, got in my truck, and drove toward the exit. In my rearview mirror, I saw Howard talking to a group of 6 or 7 people near the entrance, all of them nodding. The clubhouse lights were still on, but the voices inside had gone quiet. The gate was gone by Friday morning. I came back from town with a load of roofing screws and saw a white Ford F-150 with Hill Country Fence Company printed on the door parked at the entrance to my driveway. 2 men in high-visibility vests were dismantling the chain-link frame, using socket wrenches to unbolt the wheels from the base plates. I pulled up and cut the engine. One of them, a man in his 40s with sunburned arms, walked over. "You Mr. Turner?" he asked. I nodded. He handed me a work order on a clipboard. Pamela Stroud's signature was at the bottom, dated October 31st, with a note that read, "Remove gate from County Road 442 access point, effective immediately." I thanked him and stood back while they finished. The gate came apart in sections frame. Wheels, the laminated sign that had read private property. They loaded everything into the truck bed, tied it down with straps. and drove off. The concrete driveway stretched out in front of me, 220 feet of gray surface without a single crack, edges sharp where they met the dirt shoulders. The morning sun angled across it, throwing long shadows from the live oak branches overhead. I stood there for a minute, not celebrating, just acknowledging that the obstruction was gone and the access I'd built was mine again. Then I got back in my truck and drove up to the cabin. That afternoon, an email arrived from admin at sterlingoakshoa.org. The subject line read, "Resolution of Property Dispute." I opened it on my laptop at the plywood table. The message was brief, 2 paragraphs, signed by the Sterling Oaks Board of Directors but not by Pamela Stroud. It acknowledged that Parcel 14-B-7709 was not subject to their covenants, conditions, and restrictions, rescinded all previous notices and fees, and apologized for any inconvenience. There was no mention of the gate, no mention of trespassing, no explanation of what had changed, just a clean admission that they'd been wrong. I saved the email to my property defense folder, closed the laptop, and didn't reply. That evening, Howard called. "Jack, Pamela resigned this morning, effective immediately. The board's voting for a new president next week." I asked if she'd given a reason. Howard laughed. "She didn't have to. After what happened Wednesday night, half the neighborhood wanted her out. She knew she'd lost the room." I told him that was their business. "Not mine," he said. "You're a humble man, Jack, but you just changed this whole neighborhood. People are asking questions now about the fines, the rules, all of it. You opened a door." I thanked him and hung up. I didn't feel like I'd opened anything. I'd just defended what was already mine. The following week, Miguel and Carlos came back to finish the roof. We installed standing seam metal panels, 32-ounce steel in a charcoal gray finish, fastening them with stainless screws and EPDM rubber gaskets to keep the weather out. Miguel worked the ridge line while Carlos and I handled the lower sections, each panel locking into the next with a clean snap. By Thursday, the roof was done, the cabin sealed tight, and the sound of rain on metal became the new soundtrack whenever storms rolled through. Miguel sat on the porch steps that evening, looking down at the driveway, and said, "You know that road's gonna last 30 years, maybe more." I was tightening the last hinge on the front door. "That's the idea," I said. Carlos asked if I thought the HOA would bother me again. I shook my head. No, they know where the line is now. A week later, Bill stopped by with his grandson, a kid maybe 10 years old who wanted to see how a well got drilled. I took them out to the pump house, showed them the pressure tank and the control box, explained how the water came up from 180 feet below and got stored in a holding tank before it reached the cabin. The kid asked why I didn't just connect to city water like everyone else. I told him that when you own land, you own everything under it too. And if you can pull your own water from your own ground, you never have to ask permission to drink. Bill nodded and said, "That's a good lesson." When they left, the kid waved from the passenger window of the red Sierra, and I waved back. On Sunday, Emily drove out from Austin in her blue Honda Accord and parked on the concrete driveway. She got out, looked at the finished cabin, the roof, the porch, the road leading up from County Road 442, and smiled. "Dad, it looks good." We sat in the Adirondack chairs I'd built from cedar scraps, drinking iced tea from a Yeti cooler. She asked why I hadn't hired a lawyer from the start. I told her it would have been faster, but I wouldn't have learned what I was capable of. She said, "Mom would have been proud." I looked out at the road, the way the afternoon light moved across the surface, smooth and unbroken. "She would have helped pour it," I said. Emily asked what I was going to do next, now that the dispute was settled. I told her I'd finish the interior, install the kitchen cabinets I'd been building in the workshop, run the plumbing for the bathroom, and maybe plant some live oaks along the property line to mark the boundary with something that would outlast me. She nodded, sipped her tea, and didn't ask anything else. We sat there as the sun dropped lower, the sky turning pink and orange over the flat Texas horizon, the kind of light that makes everything look like it's been here forever and will stay that way long after you're gone. She pulled out her phone and showed me a photo she'd taken at the law school library. A copy of the Rodriguez versus Meadowbrook case opened to page 21, the page that had settled the argument before I ever walked into that clubhouse. "I'm thinking about property law as a specialty," she said. "Cases like yours, people who get pushed around by associations or developers or anyone who thinks bigger budgets mean bigger rights." I told her she'd be good at it. She had her mother's sense of fairness and my stubbornness. She laughed. "I'll take that as a compliment." Before she left, she walked the full length of the driveway with me, from the cabin down to County Road 442, running her hand along the smooth concrete surface. "It really is a good road, Dad," she said. I told her it better be. I wasn't planning on building another one. When Emily left, I walked down the driveway to County Road 442 and stood at the spot where the gate had been. There were no tire tracks anymore, no marks on the concrete, nothing to show it had ever been there except my own memory and the photographs stored in my phone. I thought about the 72 days I'd spent clearing brush and leveling ground before I poured the first footer for the cabin. I thought about the woman with the clipboard who'd tried to rewrite the terms of ownership with letters and fees and threats. And I thought about what it meant to build something with your own hands on land you bought with your own money, and how that wasn't something anyone could take away as long as you were willing to defend it with patience, evidence, and the law. This road didn't just go to the house. It went to everything I'd earned. Not just the 2.3 acres or the cabin or the well or the septic system, but the principle that a man should be able to come home without asking permission. I'd spent 2 months clearing brush and laying gravel, spent 3 weeks mixing and pouring concrete, spent 5 weeks gathering documents and filing reports and standing in front of a room full of strangers to say what was true. And now the road was open. The gate was gone. And the only authority that mattered was the deed in my filing cabinet and the work I'd done to make the land my own. I turned and walked back up the driveway as the last light faded, the sound of my boots on concrete the only sound in the quiet evening air. Some things are worth defending, not with anger, not with violence, but with the steady, undeniable weight of being right. If Jack's story reminded you of a time when someone tried to tell you what you could or couldn't do on your own property, you're not alone. Every week on the HOA Stories, we share real accounts from people who stood their ground against overreach, bureaucracy, and neighbors who mistook authority for ownership. Some won with paperwork, some won with patience. All of them won because they refused to back down when they knew they were right. Drop a comment below and tell us, have you ever had to fight for something that was already yours? What did you learn? Your story might be the one that helps someone else find the courage to stand firm. And if you know someone dealing with an HOA dispute right now, share this with them. Sometimes the best defense is knowing you're not the first person to walk this road, and you won't be the last. Subscribe to the HOA Stories, because every property line is worth defending, and every story deserves to be heard.